Welcome to ZOOMERTIMES TV. And here's your host, Anita Finley.
Hello, everybody. I'm Anita Finley, of course, and I am the host of your ZOOMERTIMES TV, and I'm so privileged to have the best people on our show. We save them on YouTube, and I was very fortunate recently to have and especially was in the Boomer Times, of course, Book of the Month, and Lisa is calling in from North Carolina. She actually lives in Coconut Grove normally, but for the next many months, she's up in North Carolina. And we're going to find out about her book. Now, the name of the book is The Apple and the Shady Tree, The Mafia, My Family, and Me. When I first got that book, Lisa, I thought, what in the name of heaven is this book about?
Yep.
And of course, you live this life. This is not casual. This is not a memoir. It's an actual book, and it's filled with. I learned so much about the mafia, so much about so many things from this. How long did this book take you to write?
The book took me 4.5 years, but not because I sat down and didn't write. I wasn't, disciplined. It took me because I had bouts with my psychoanalyst over, I can't do this. I'm afraid I was throwing somebody under the bus. I was afraid that I would continue with these nightmares. I suffered PTSD from a lot of the events in the book, and it was dredging up a lot of bad stuff, and I was terrified, but she just kept pushing me and pushing me. So 4.5 years later, I had a book.
What were you doing then when you left? Of course, you were not living in Coconut Grove at this time where you live now.
Yes, well, I had moved down here.
Oh.
My father died in 2010,
Oh.
and I was left with a mother that suffers from mental illness and a sister who suffers from mental illness. And I'm not 100% in the mental illness category. So I was working on myself, and my daughter had gone to University of Miami at the time, and friends down in Florida had said to me, a fabulous guy came on the market, a beloved judge, and you better move quickly because once he has the open house, he's going to be gone. So he called me, and Stanford Blake, a 22-year veteran of the circuit court bench, called me, and I was married in 2017 and picked up everything from New York and moved down for love.
Oh, now see, that's a story in itself.
It is.
He's one of the chapters, but that's a whole book, isn't it?
Yes. I was 52 years old, and I had very peacefully resigned myself to the fact there would be many, many love affairs going forward, but not a husband. And this took me totally by surprise, as so many things in my life have, and it's been a life changer. So I'm very happy.
Yeah, well, you've had a lot of life changes. So let's just talk about it. I know why, but why did you name it The Apple and the Shady Tree?
Well, first of all, it's a double entendre. I'm the apple, and my father, who was the moneymaker for the Genovese crime family, he's the shady tree. But it was more than that. It is my parents, aside from the mafia component, my parents both had mental health issues. It's generational, it's genetic, and I've dealt with it well. My daughter has dealt with it well. My parents did not address it, and we suffered from it. So they were constantly battling with one another in their 53-year-old marriage. And I would side with one or the other. They were always pulling me in at all the times. And I could almost hear Dr. Phil cringing, saying, I'm an officer of the court and I'm taking these kids away from you. I could just see it all the time. So they, one or the other, whoever I was siding with, would not nicely say, you're just like your father. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. You're just like your mother. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So it was a very apt naming for the book.
Absolutely, it was. When did you, of course, growing up, they took very good care of you as far as sending you to the best schools and a lot of things like that. But when did you first realize that that there were shady dealings going on.
I grew up with Sally Boxcars and Benny Eggs Mangano, who was the head of the Genovese family, and Funzi Thierry and Johnny Sausage Barbato. These were my uncles. These were the people that were closest to me. And you should know that I'm Jewish. My parents were both 100% Jewish. So my father was never a made person, because if you watch The Goodfellas and Sopranos, you know that he, as a Jewish person with Russian background, was not allowed to be a member of the mafioso crowd. So there seems to be a little differences here. I always knew that my father had connections to the mafia. As a young child, I knew we were different. I grew up in the 5 towns of Long Island, which is 99% Jewish. All my friends, their parents were accountants and doctors and lawyers. My father owned a pretzel company. And as my mother explained to me, if anybody asks what he does, he's an entrepreneur. She wasn't hiding. She was just trying to give it a label. She was an entrepreneur. So we stood out. We were like, I describe it as the Munster family of Valley Lane North. My parents, Fred and what was her name? Lily Munster. They dressed differently. They talked differently. They didn't play golf. They didn't play mahjong. There was no canasta. There was no country club. There was nothing. We were very much apart in the neighborhood. Their friends lived in the village of New York, in Greenwich Village. We did not celebrate Jewish holidays. There was no Jewish identity in my home. We celebrated Christmas, and I went on Easter hunts and everything. So I knew that you just had to look at my father. He was a big, tough guy, and he was not a jolly fellow. You know, there was no one would look at John Novick and say, gee, what a fun guy he is. So I knew that who these people were, that they had mafia connections. But it wasn't until I received a subpoena to appear before a grand jury, a mob-related investigation in December of 1988, that I realized that my father was not just connected to these people. They weren't just people he knew, that he had a role with them. And that I subsequently learned many years later, the exact role was the moneymaker for the Genovese family.
I want to go way back, though. I want to go back to his parents and your mom's parents. Yeah. What were they like? Did you know your grandparents?
I did. I was fortunate enough to know all 4 of my grandparents. And I take pains in the book to take you back all the way to the birth of my father and my mother, so that you can see that the moneymaker of a crime family didn't wake up one morning and go, let's see, should I get an MBA or law degree, or should I, sign up with the mafia? He came from, my father grew up in Brownsville, Brooklyn, which even today, with gentrified, fabulous Brooklyn, that's the one area that still remains ungentrified, because it is traditionally a very rough and tough area. It was traditionally Jewish. There were Italians, there were Irish. It was a whole mix. My paternal grandfather, was very sickly, and my father had to go to work at a very young age. And my paternal grandmother, was known as the neighborhood Fabicina, which, for those of you who don't know, she was an unhappy person. She never had anything nice to say. And that's the way I knew her, always a sourpuss. But when you realize the life that she had, they were poor, poor, poor. It gives context to her behavior. So my father was an excellent basketball player with Jefferson High School. It was a very elite group known as the Jefferson Basketeers. And because he came from this background, there were very few opportunities for him. He couldn't go to college. It wasn't even a thought. He was approached to go into professional basketball. But what I recently learned, only a few years ago, so it never made it into the book, was that he had already made all his mafia ties. He was already in the neighborhood, and they had approached him to throw the games, to rig the games, because these high school basketball games were very important. There was no TV and internet, so the high school neighborhood games became important, and he was a real star. And that he refused to do that because he knew that's one way out quickly.
I love that.
So, yeah, I wanted everybody to know that there's reasons. Don't judge so quickly why somebody becomes the moneymaker for a crime family, because he didn't have the opportunities. He did not have the money. He did not have the loving family. He did not have the support. His brother, my Uncle Stanley, who was 5 years younger than him and was also on the Jefferson High School basketball team, was a heroin addict for decades and decades and decades. You know, people think heroin just came about in the 70s and the 80s. It has been around for decades, ruining people's lives. And the twist on that was that he ultimately, in his 60s, became the head of Beth Israel in New York's methadone clinic, the whole program. But by then, his body was ravaged, his relationships, failed marriages, children, everything had gone. So he came from a very sad family, my father. My mother, on the other hand, and I discuss her background too. She came from a very nice family. My grandpa Moishi and my grandma Frida were very influential in my life. They had money. They owned a luncheonette on the corner right across the street in the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn. But my mother was a very difficult child. She was very, very bright, but she was difficult. She would get into trouble. She was defiant. She was a loner, and she was very beautiful, extraordinarily beautiful, which probably saved her in life. What I've learned later on is, though never clinically diagnosed, formally diagnosed, my mother fits almost all of the categories for borderline personality disorder. And for any of you that know what that mental illness is, it's a very bad diagnosis because they don't see anything wrong with them. They are the victims of everybody else's behavior. And one of the characteristics is the inability to form close relationships. So as my sister and I, children of a mother suffering from this kind of illness, never seeking help for it or medication until we were long out of the house, it was devastating. So we came with both a lot of encumbrances on both sides of my genetic tree. And consequently, I suffered from anxiety and depression, which I use medication and a lot of therapy. My daughter suffers from it. But the difference is, at this stage in the game, we use every tool available to be highly functional. If we can't cure this thing, we're going to give it a run for the money. So.
Well, you know, I'm sitting here mesmerized by you, and this is Lisa Novick Goldberg, and she's a great writer, but you are so articulate and so,
thank you.
So,
thank you.
I would say so human, and I just love talking with you. And I can see why you've been very successful. So the book, though, you know, even though it's a small book, I mean, it's, you know, it's only a total of, well, I think 400 or something. Let me just see. It's only a total of, yeah, it's about 400.
200 my pages.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. That's right. But
that was the other book I wrote, Anita. That was War and Peace that you're thinking of. That was the other book I wrote.
Yes. I mean, so, you know, you have been well educated. You are worldly. You are kind, and it all went together. And here is a woman who was not involved with the mafia. She didn't do any of those things. It's just all around her. And then all about her family, and then about her and how it came about. And I don't want to run out of time, but I want to tell you that it was cute how she told us about her husband and, you know, and how that all happened. So what I want you to do, though, is I do want you to read something about your father, your mother. I think authors need to read a little bit, because even though we read a book, you wrote it and it comes out of you. So why don't you choose what you would like to read about?
Aside from the depression, anxiety, mental health issues, we were a very funny family. They were characters. When my father was good, if he had a winner in his sports business, things were good. If the sun was shining on my mother that day, it was shining on all of us. And I grew up in a very sarcastic, funny, real background. So this is just to give you an indication of what the dynamics were like between my mother and father. My mom and my all-time favorite daddy story was the time that my parents and Solly Boxcars and his wife were invited to a black tie affair, and they needed to rent tuxedos for the occasion. They went to a place owned by a friend of a friend of a friend who fully outfitted them. The proud shoppers came back home to my parents' house, and like teenage girls after a trip to the mall, donned their new outfits to show my mother. Solly was resplendent in a powder blue tuxedo trimmed in navy with a huge bow tie and a matching cummerbund. My dad sported, now you should know my dad was about at this time in the late 70s, about 260 pounds. My dad sported the same number, but in light beige with brown trim. The ruffled shirt, bow tie, and cummerbund made my father look like the dancing bear from the Captain Kangaroo show. My mother was temporarily speechless, and then words of disbelief spilled forth. Are you kidding me? You guys look like something from a strolling minstrel show. Johnny, beige, beige? Buttercream, he corrected her. She continued, you look like an elephant dressed in a tuxedo. Who sold you these costumes? I won't go anywhere with you dressed like that. Boxcars and my father were visibly hurt by her reaction. What do you know? My father retorted. The salesman told us that these are the latest spring colors. Oh, really? She shot back. Johnny, listen to me. You look like a fat Easter bunny. The bow tie, the ruffled shirt. You have no neck as it is. You both look like schmucks. Take them back and get black tuxedos. Not mint green, not lilac, just black. And these are not embellished stories. These are all stories that have kind of percolated in my head since my childhood.
Yeah, see, so that's interesting. You were able to take something that was true, but you embellished it and made it wonderful. And so that people would sit there and laugh. So I think what that does, it takes people who think, oh, mafia, bad, bad, bad. And of course, your father, one thing you told me, and all the pretzel vendors were really your father's company. And
Well,
know, how many of us have gone to New York? We've always had to have a pretzel, one of those hot pretzels with mustard, right?
Whether it was delicious or a lethal weapon. My father owned the bakery that supplied the pretzels to the vendors on New York at Madison Square Garden. This was his business. In his dying days, when I gained enough courage to ask him about the business, because I didn't grow up in a lavish lifestyle. I said, where did you get the money in the 60s, Daddy, to open this business? And that was Funzi Thierry, Frank Funzi, who was the head of the Genovese crime family and my father's surrogate father. He loved my father, and the limitations because of my father's Jewishness and not Italianness were evident in their relationship, their professional relationship, but that was my father's real daddy. So.
That's so interesting. And then your daughter, it was a beautiful chapter on your daughter. Why don't you share what your daughter does today and how
my daughter was busy. She inherited the anxiety and the depression that we suffer from very severely, actually. And she had some drug issues while at the University of Miami in the mid 2000s. I would never speak this way without consulting her. But here is a woman that worked very hard. I encouraged her to go into therapy, unlike my mother, who told me you cannot go into therapy, it makes for crazy people. Between medication and therapy and a totally different home life, I parented the complete opposite of everything that my parents did, the complete and total opposite. And she had a lot of love and a lot of encouragement and a peaceful home. She didn't have that constant angst and there was no, when I was growing up, you never knew when you opened up the front door what you were going to get. And you can't thrive in that kind of environment. So I made sure Maggie had that. She never went into rehab with her drug problem. She conquered it herself. She is a highly successful worker at Apple Corporation in Austin, and we are very, very close. And she loves her grandpa very, very much. She has problems with my mom, but that's my biggest accomplishment, my daughter. So.
And Lisa, believe it or not, we're just about run out of time, but you will get another interview. This is our first one.
Thank you so much.
You're so beautiful. And it
Thank
was such a pleasure.
you.
I have a smile on my face. I don't think it's stopped since you've been on.
Thank you. I have loved this and I appreciate everything. And I'll wait to hear from you.
Oh, yes. And you will see this is going to go on YouTube and then everywhere. But The Apple and the Shady Tree, everybody, I want you to see this. You will want to get this book. It's out of your probably what you know about. That's what makes it exciting. But it's true. See, this isn't just a novel. This is true. And so you want to read it and you want to applaud Lisa Goldberg for it. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody, and a good summer.
Yeah.
Bye.
Have fun in North Carolina. We'll be talking to you again, Lisa.
Take care.
All right.